Designing large-scale science fiction transport ships is a good time. Especially when using the classic design dichotomy of opposing sensory and shape languages. But what does that have to do with aircraft carriers, container ships and speedboats? Watch along to find out. Welcome to Technouveau. My name is Rasmus. I'm an art director and concept designer with 20 years of professional games development experience, and I'm on a mission to inspire and empower your creativity by talking about concept design development, and all the shades of that craft. And today I want to show you a transporter design, a container ship, a science fiction container ship, if you will, that is featured in the Big, Medium, Small Modelshop Greebles pack. There's a bunch of ships there, 7 ships by now. Made a lot of ships for that pack. So it's a good good excuse to dig in and show you some details of that. Let's check it out. So here we are in Blender, and here we see the ship laid out before us. And the first thing to really mention and the first thing to really notice, I believe, is this here very elongated stack of containers against what is otherwise a familiar jumbled spaceship with a somewhat retro aesthetic. And these two ideas are really intended to be somewhat counterintuitive and to be somewhat of a design dichotomy. If we look at the ship from above, it almost looks like the Empire State Building stacked laid on its side here, and in many respects it's really inspired by the same principles of the Millennium Falcon and the fact that it's pushing its cargo. So these two sort of this elongated container stack and the cluster of let's say engines is really key to the design. If we look a little bit closer, we have a version of the ship here where we can see some of the thinking of the container stacking. It's a somewhat non-resolved magnetic force fieldy type thing, I suppose, where the containers slot in and are held somewhat in place. However, I have stacked containers outside of that core shape because I felt it looked great, and it gave the ship some of the classic container ship notes, if you will, where the containers are stacked unevenly, and I think it really helped with the aesthetic of it. You can see here we have some smaller compartments, container parts that are smaller than the rest of them, assuming that the ship can accept that as well. And you can say from a structural assembly and fixation point of view, it's unresolved. I'm okay with that. I don't think we have to have screws and hinges on a ship that is several hundred meters long. But, you know, I just wanted to mention it here. You can see it breaks the shape of this otherwise high-risey feel. But nonetheless, that is what it is. If we come back to the rear here, I think the most important factor are these 8 engine blocks. Massive scale. And this is funny because they remind me of the quad-engined speedboats that you find around the world, that of course are designed to go as fast as possible with no Fs given whatsoever. And the body of the ship is also quite sleek, as you can see here on both sides. It has that classic ship-like V shape ending in these engines here, and it's almost like a hot rod in a sense that it feels. What am I saying here? There are several feelings at the same time as you see this design. And I think that's really interesting. And for those of you who are familiar with my designs, you will certainly notice that I've placed some sort of odd intakes here as well. I love my intakes on starships. And I explain it as if they suck in 0-point energy from the fabric of the universe itself, or something like that. I don't assume that they're actually sucking in matter of any form. So I sort of made up a wishy-washy science fiction-esque idea of what it is. As you well know, I love my Star Wars as well, and I like having spaceships that feel relatable before they feel logical. I think it's a fun space to be in. Obviously, you and I will discuss this a lot, and some of you certainly do in the comments once in a while. But that's where that comes from. I like having that sense of engineering relatability, even though it doesn't really make sense. I like how it feels, right? So 8 huge intakes for 8 huge engines, and this here rear heavy skyscraper with containers laying down on its side. So that's the foundation of the ship. If we start to take a look at some of the details, the first thing you'll probably notice is, and again, for those of you who know me, I'm a big fan of asymmetry. The first thing you might notice is that I have a few different components on either side of the ship here to give some of that visual drama, if you will. The first one here is a massive radar dish and some sort of unknown radar dome defense system maybe. And on the other side, this is where it really starts to look more like a aircraft carrier. Here we have the bridge, and you can see the texture mapping is a little rough when you come in close, but I think it still works. This is where we have all of our control and radar domes, and you can imagine our naval officers fumbling around on the bridge here. You can see there's a little bit of a quick interior. And again, the shape of this is sort of put on a similar base as the radar dome over here, and then it has this sort of neck extension coming back to give it that forward sweep. Alongside this, we have stabilizers down here with some defense weaponry on the edge, similar on the other side. And then we have the fun thing that sort of ties the design back a little bit to maybe more of a credible universe, is these positioning thrusters, like real classic science fiction trope. We have 3 banks of these on either side, and you can imagine them if the ship is coming in. I don't even know how fast this goes. Does it go to hyperspace or not? I'm not sure. But if it wants to break down, you can imagine the ship simply turning itself around and blasting its boosters to break. And here's some more defense systems. And again, it's some clunky mechanical parts here. Got some pipes into these vents. You know, I'm letting the texture speak to me, and it's fairly rough, and it's okay. I think it works at the distance. And yes, it's a mix of credible notes, such as the positioning thrusters, the overall concept of a container ship in 0G, mixed with sort of more emotional aspects like the engine layout, intakes, a little stabilizing winglet with weapons underneath it, and then the asymmetrical approach to some of the larger features. So it's a mix of both logical thinking and emotional thinking. One of my favorite topics, really. And again, one of the more credible logical things is having these cranes that I imagine can travel down the spine, maybe, to give this sense that the ship can do a few maneuvers like this. Out in the nose, we have sort of an alien-esque inspired sensor cluster with dishes and antennas and whatnot. That really finishes off the design. So as usual, a mix of credible notes and more fantastical emotional notes. This is how I like most of my designs, and this is also what triggers some of you in the comments to get a little frustrated with me, because it isn't exactly scientifical. And I think it's fun to see the discussions in a sense, because it is really what it is about. You can argue certain things be credible or not, or you can throw it all to the wind. But I would suppose that if you do a piece of entertainment and the questions are hanging in the air, then you could argue that there's reasons for that, and that means that the designs or the presentation haven't been resolved good enough. At the same time, of course, there are people that are more interested in being critical and spotting holes than they are about being entertained or being carried away. And actually they get a kick out of punching holes in the logic of the material, media and designs that they watch. So us as designers, I would say we have to be open to the critique, and at the same time we have to be open to the fact that certain people's minds are simply designed to punch holes, and that we don't really have to please these people either. So it's a balance. I think there are lessons out there for sure and good advice for sure, and at the same time there are certainly people that get a kick out of being disparaging to people. So that's a balance, that's the eternal balance, and it's part of the fun, I would say, and part of the challenge for us to get away with this. But for this time, I'm just explaining to you what the thoughts were for this design and how I personally enjoy that balance between the two forces, the forces of logic and the forces of emotion. Science fiction container ships. A trope of the genre. I mean, transport ships, I guess, is a trope of many genres. Usually often needed to drive the story forward. Lots of fun to do, and many different ways of doing it. And I feel like this was one of the classic ways of doing it. If you disagree, of course, let me know in the comments. If you agree, but please let me know in the comments as well. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Cheers. You don't cheer in coffee. All right. Anyway.